Okay, well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's Living with Parkinson's Meetup. I'm Chris Kruger, Senior Manager for Content at the Davis Phinney Foundation. I'm really glad to welcome you to the first Living with Parkinson's Meetup of 2025. So the topic for today's meetup is emotions. Many people with Parkinson's experience changes in their emotions. Responses to things may be more or less intense than expected, or maybe they change in some other way. As with everything in Parkinson's, there's just a lot of different layers to explore, and that's what we're going to do today. Because this is a sort of challenging topic to talk about, I just want to note that we're not going to speak about this in a clinical or technical way. So we may say depressed, and we might not be describing something that would maybe classify as clinical depression. So just don't assume that we're speaking clinically, please. We're sharing our own experiences. The panelists will share the way Parkinson's has impacted their lives, and just how emotions have been impacted specifically by Parkinson's. So to start today, I just want to draw attention to something called the Pseudo Bulbar Effect, or affect rather. We have a blog post about this topic, and I think Annie can put a link to that in the chat. But just as a quick summary, it's the Pseudo Bulbar Effect, or PBA, just for an abbreviation since it's a little easier to say, is a kind of emotional incontinence. Maybe it might involve short outbursts of kind of unpredictable or sudden laughing or crying or frustration, just an emotion that kind of seems to develop very quickly. I don't want to assume anybody on this panel has experienced that directly, but I guess so instead of asking about if anybody's experienced that, I think I'll start by saying, since being diagnosed, how have your emotions surprised you?
Well, I can start. I've been more emotional since I developed Parkinson's. I've found I'm crying more than I used to. I was brought up when my dad sort of taught me that men don't cry, and so I sort of suppressed my tears for a long time. But since having Parkinson's, I found there's a lot more to be sad about, and having crying episodes. And I've been working on just sort of letting the tears come and experience them and not suppressing them. And I find that actually feels good at the end. You have a good catharsis, and you feel like you've cried everything out, and you just feel like there's something's been lifted off you. So I think for me, Parkinson's has resulted in more crying episodes.
I think I've actually had the opposite effect. I was always a crier. Commercials, TV, songs, everything made me cry all the time. And I've gone through serious bouts where I feel no emotion whatsoever, to stuff that would normally, I know, make me cry. And I think the apathy has really taken a hit with that one. And when we talk about apathy, I think that for a while I thought that it was depression, but I've also felt depression, and it's a completely different ballgame than apathy is. Like, it was just so dark.
Yeah, Amber, I'm interested in the experience of having a sort of, I don't want to say flatter approach, but just that sort of calmed sort of, it's harder to feel things more robustly. I don't know how to say more about that. What is that like for you?
Well, it was actually really concerning because I am a crier. I'm a big crier. Everything makes me cry. And so there was a good couple of months where I'm like, I haven't cried and I can't even remember how long, which is completely unusual for me. So I was actually getting concerned. I'm like, I think I'm broken. I think that I have completely broken and I don't know what to. And then sure enough, something made me cry and I'm like, whew, okay, I'm all right. Go ahead, Kat.
Yeah, it's interesting because I like you, Amber, had my kids would say I'd cry at anything always. And I think that at the beginning of my Parkinson's journey, I definitely felt like it was a shorter reaction time between the feeling and a reaction, whether it was sadness, like quick tears, or whether it was a startled reflex. I read somebody commented like a loud noise might make them cry. I definitely have felt that also, like that overstimulation happens really quickly. So I moved from having a lot of what I would have called PBA. I'm making sure I'm not saying PDA because we were laughing about that earlier. So PBA. So that quick effect. And I have moved the last year into the apathy, this very flat feeling of it's not depressed necessarily because it doesn't feel as dark to me. It doesn't feel quite as debilitating, but it's even in terms of what do I feel like to eat tonight? I don't care. Am I even really hungry? I don't know. It's this kind of paralysis almost around things.
Numbness.
I feel like there's no feedback coming, no feedback system anymore for me feeling good about getting things accomplished, making a decision, planning things. So I'm trying to make decisions based on very small lists for my day so that I don't get stuck doing absolutely nothing or in that loop of not doing anything, not making any decision, not doing anything because I don't have a plan. So even if it's just, I'm going to empty the dishwasher today, I'm going to have a shower. That may sound really funny, but when you don't feel like having a shower or don't get reward from having a shower, it's like, why shower? It's just an odd feeling. So I just want to there's a lot written about apathy and how we don't really know about it. It's just a very different feeling. And I'm in some ways I miss my old self. In other ways, I think, maybe this is an easier way to manage my energy. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'd love to hear any thoughts about how people kind of get themselves out of it. I'm hoping that it will cycle again as life often does. So
That's what I was just thinking, actually. Do any of you have some really good tips on like what, especially the food thing for me, or even the shower thing, like Kat said, I find that when my executive function is less than it used to be as well. So when I look at this thing that seems basic, like feeding myself, but I'm apathetic to the food and my executive function is low, like I can't make ingredients into a meal at that moment. So I would love to hear tips from anyone who I love the list idea, but how are you dealing in that moment with doing things basic like feeding yourself and getting into the shower?
I have no problem feeding myself. In fact, it's the opposite. I'll stuff my face full of sugar and sweets and things I shouldn't, but that kind of is on topic because if I'm not feeling well, I get into a state of emotional dysregulation and I lean into poor habits that aren't good for me. And in the moment, they seem great, but for me, some of what you're saying, Shan, I have to balance anxiety. That's the overwhelming one for me. It's not so much apathy, but anxiety, this overreaction to seemingly small things. I have to pull that into perspective. And as far as tools, I don't know how much you guys know about cognitive behavioral therapy, but trying to control my thoughts from escalating or the lack thereof, like really coming from a thinking perspective and sort of tampering the emotional overwhelm and realizing that I do have agency over my apathy, over my depression, over my anxiety. It's hard in the moment, but I think okay, I don't feel like exercising, but I know it's good for me. So that's more of a thought thing than an emotional thing. But if I don't find a way to manage the emotions, I just get all out of whack.
Yeah. For me, I fluctuate from those periods of numbness, where like you just numb. You don't really care either way or the other, and you just can't make a decision and it's just there to and it always happens when I'm working in the meeting where I'll just want to cry. And that's horrible. And I feel embarrassed. Luckily, I do work in a place where they understand and I have an awesome, team that will help me and just kind of help me guide me a little bit or kind of ignore that situation where I can go on, shut my camera for a moment and mute myself and be okay. But what has worked for me is I do this rule that for today I'm going to do one thing that's good for myself, right? And whether it's doing a laundry, and I that one thing I don't say just putting it to wash, because then I'll forget to put it to dry, right? So that one thing is one load of laundry. Like I wash it, I dry it, I fold it, I put it away. That's one. That's one. That encompasses one, not just because I will forget it and then I'll have to rewash it with vinegar or whatever because it's been a couple days. So so those are type of things that you have to kind of set yourself as a role. And then I am like I try to celebrate those moments when I do it. It's just I know it's silly. I put together my first 1,000-piece puzzle, last year, and it was a bunch of plants, and I was going to frame it because I wanted it to be in my room as showing me that I could do hard, annoying things. And that's what I do. I walk by it and I'm like, yeah, I did that. And so, those are little things that I'm trying to look at as a positive. But it's so far working for me.
So every victory counts.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Victory.
Whoop, whoop.
Right.
So I noticed that Christy's had her hand up. I just want to draw two things to a close and then point to Chris, not to a close necessarily, but make a couple observations and then get Christy engaged here. Kat, you said that you didn't get the reward of the shower or of the food. And then Stan mentioned crying, and that feels kind of like it's kind of like feels good afterwards. I, like Stan, am definitely a crier now more than I was before. And it does kind of, I wonder if this is part of the again, not clinically speaking here, but just thinking about dopamine and getting the sort of impact that dopamine might have given us in the past. I seek out my ice cream. Karen seeks out the sweets that she mentioned, and Kat's, thinking about the fact that she's not getting that experience. And so I'm just wondering about that intersection there. It's interesting to me that these are we're maybe not getting what we thought we would get, and we go to more extremes to get there, maybe. Anyway, just a thought that I thought came to me as people were speaking. And Christy, you had your hand up. What's going on?
Yeah, like Kat and Amber, I just don't care. So I'm very apathetic about everything. But I use that to control my anxiety. So I actually harness the energy of the apathy to control everything around me. And I make my list and I cross them off and I do I take my shower every day because I have to, because I put weird stuff in my hair that makes it sticky to spike it up a little bit. Or try to. So then I have to shower every day. So it makes it so I have to do it. And I really don't care about eating. I do like sweet stuff. So I do make cakes often and eat them, which I shouldn't. But I have to do that because I like it. And
Yeah,
I
that's
can't help myself.
good point. You have to make sure you do. If there is something you like, you got to do it, right? Kat, you raise your
Right,
hand.
which is an issue.
Yeah, and I used to have that, with the anxiety. I feel like I've sort of experienced the gamut of things. I've had bouts, some of depression, and definitely have struggled with anxiety, and I loved your wording, Karen, around, seeking out things that aren't the best for me, because, it made me feel a certain way. And food was definitely an issue for me. Like when I was on the agonists, that was really a challenge. And it's just very interesting. Like Amber, I'm sort of surprised by it, because never in a million years did I think I'd have kind of this more flat time in my life. So it's surprising. And Christy, it's a great point that, we have to just keep moving forward. And I think little lists, and I'm just like you, Nicole, I forget things in the washing machine all the time. So now I have Post-it notes that say dryer kind of all over the house that I put up to make sure I've gotten things. Once I get it in the dryer, I'm good for some reason. It's just that transition where it's like gone. So I think showing up, staying connected with my community is really helpful. I think this discussion is helpful. I find that I've brought it up with my counselor in my therapy sessions, which have been helpful. But a lot of people don't quite know what to do with us that are apathetic.
Me included.
Yeah, it's just hard. So yeah, I'm really
And
curious if you have thoughts, like Shan said, put them in the chat. What helps you, lists and post-it notes are saving my life at the moment and keeping me at least washed.
And that could be even right
Well,
to
and I
read
struggle
them.
more because when I don't have the kids, I don't need to shower and I don't need to make myself eat. When I have the kids, you got to do it. So it's not a big deal. But those weeks when I don't have them is when I'm like, ugh, I really need to push myself to do something.
Yeah.
Get out of bed.
Crackers,
Stand
I
up.
think, work well for dinner. Cheese and crackers, nice and easy.
How
Girl dinner.
take
Yeah,
medication?
I've been practicing things like that though, right? What are like safe foods that I can easily prepare? And I say safe, but like things that I don't get sick of. Or so you can guarantee I have the same breakfast every single day for my whole life now because the food isn't that exciting anyway. So I might as well find something that I can eat regularly, that's easy to prepare, and then I know I'm going to do it. I have a routine of eating this food at this time because I think I don't hear people talk about it a lot, but you're my movement disorder specialist told me you're at a lot more risk to be slightly underweight than to be overweight with Parkinson's because it just increases your risk over time, right? And it's easy for us to lose weight by accident. So I try really hard to not, and I found that that's a nice way. Have crack. What someone just called it girl dinner, that crackers and cheese thing. That's a great option, actually. That's a nice, easy. I can grab it and I know I can eat it. So it's not like gonna be a full nutritious thing for you forever. But if you're having that moment, I find having things like that on hand is helpful.
I have teenagers at home, and to think of dinner meals, it's really daunting. And sometimes I get really upset because I cook something and I'm like, you ate it already? This is supposed to last a week because I can't make myself think of something else to make. And so it's so funny because, of course, it's like a teenager raising another teenager, right? We both have the same I don't care attitude. So luckily they're very patient with me when I'm like, what? It's Tuesday. You ate it already? Of course they're gonna eat it. I just cooked one meal. But that's the way it is.
Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
I have a question for you guys. Somebody in the chat was talking about anxiety and depression as other common non-motor symptoms in Parkinson's. I take medication for those things, and it's helped me a lot. I'm curious how many of you take medications to augment helping with that, and how did you feel about it when you took them? I know for me, I don't know. I've had to change them a couple times, which has been hard too. And finding a good psychiatrist that knew about Parkinson's was also hard, but that's a big part of my emotional plan. What about you guys?
I think I don't take medications for anxiety, depression, but I think that it's anxiety and depression are interesting because there's a big stigma about them. People don't have a hard time talking about them, but they really have a pretty high rate of success as far as treatment goes between therapy and medication. So people who have them, unlike a lot of medicine diseases, including Parkinson's, they have a pretty good rate of being treatable. So it's important, I think, for people to talk about it more, seek help, and get treatment because the treatment can be helpful.
Yeah, just one quick observation about that. As you pursue that option, if you do, just make sure you talk to your movement disorder specialist or at least neurologist about that because there are so many possible interactions and there's so many nuances. Like you might read that an antidepressant might impact pain or something like that, but there's dose elements to that. There's all sorts of variables. So talk to a knowledgeable provider about these questions for sure.
And there are some real risks to stop taking some things suddenly. So
When I was going through the process to get diagnosed, the doctor obviously didn't know what the hell was going on and put me under like every medication under the moon and stars. And one of them was I don't remember if it was an antipsychotic or an anxiety medication, way, it was the first and only time I've ever had suicidal thoughts, and that scared me straight. Couldn't ever take it again, and now because of that experience, I'm terrified to even reach that subject.
I love myself.
Even though I definitely deal with anxiety.
I can't
I
live
was
without
talking.
myself.
I was talking to another person with Parkinson's the other day, and I find it interesting. I think I have, Karen, it sounded to me like you were expressing maybe a difficulty having to take that type of medication. And I have the exact opposite experience where I struggle with mental health issues prior to developing Parkinson's. And I've found it a mental health relief to have a condition people consider a real problem. Because I find that if you only have a mental health illness, it's hard to be taken seriously, and people feel like you should be able to just get up and do it better. But it was a relief to have a physical ailment causing things like depression, anxiety, because then I have like an excuse to the greater society, which isn't fair or right, but it is my experience. So I've found the depression and anxiety stuff to be easier with Parkinson's rather than harder, which I don't think is common, but is shared with at least one other person.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I also have that situation. I guess more I was thinking about for those watching, I hear some people who are newly diagnosed with that, just hesitation about taking medication. I had an experience, Amber, that my neurologist wanted me to take a typical antipsychotic medication, which he said was really good for anxiety and depression. And I was offended. I was like, I'm not taking an antipsychotic, psychotically, I said that to him. No, but I was very hesitant. I judged that he was judging me and offering that medication. And honestly, when I did eventually try the medication, I'd wished I'd done it sooner. It can be used for other things, and I was placing meaning upon it that really wasn't real. I just wanted symptom relief, and truthfully, that medication helped me. I know you had difficulty with the medication, Amber, but
yeah, and it's unfortunate because that was before I had anxiety. And so now that I'm dealing with anxiety and it's kind of scared me off, I'm like, well, it'd be helpful to be able to rely on that. But now I'm so scared to touch it because now I do deal with depression. Now I do have anxiety. And so the thought of putting something into my system that before made me have suicidal thoughts, and now I have real reason to like act those out, it's scary.
I can understand that. I'm thinking of this saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Give it another chance, and hopefully with like total supervision, obviously from a physician, but I hate for you to suffer when there's relief. And maybe that relief isn't medication, but I guess I brought it up because there's people in the chat who are mentioning it, and I think it's common. I run a support group for young onset Parkinson's, and I find a lot of people are afraid of medication that I come across. So I was curious how you guys felt about it.
Amber, I feel the same way about when I first started. I was really afraid of taking medication, and I was my movement disorder specialist kind of talked me into trying anti-anxiety, and that was exactly what I needed. I prior to taking them, I was a little psychotic because and my kids were like, oh my gosh, you're really, what's going on, right? And so I had to start those, and it took that edge off. It really helped me out to look at things, and it kind of lifted that cloud. So
It's
I
funny
really
that you say
appreciate
that
it.
because my kids have told me that I'm too emotional, and I feel like I don't have any emotion. What are you talking about? But yeah, I'm probably psychotic in their
They
eyes.
see it. They see it. Yeah.
Amber, you were just talking about your kids for a moment, and I'm just wondering if maybe one thing we haven't touched on is how emotions have changed or impacted your relationships of any sort. Has anybody found? I mean, I think probably yes. So how has that happened for you?
Well, I think like with me, my kids, like I said, they tell me that I'm emotional all the time. But like I said, I was emotional prior to Parkinson's, so I don't know that that would have been any different. I would tell you that apathy definitely impacts my relationships the most because I just don't care. I don't have the desire to make the effort to make plans and follow through with them and go out and do all the things with friends or even family or anything like that.
I will say I've been married a very long time, but longer than some of you have been alive. I think that's hard to say, but it'll be 35 years this year. But my husband, I'm trying to get better at really listening and not feeling defensive or it's hard because I am a retired nurse practitioner and I know I feel like I have a broad foundation of knowledge about treating mental health stuff. I did a lot of it in my clinical practice. So it's hard because I've sort of been the family expert for a long time, and it's hard to give up that self-identifying thing to Parkinson's. It's also hard to hear that there's changes that are impacting the relationship in behaviors. But I have found if we do it when we're not mad at each other or not in a head-butting time, it's much more helpful. And I'm trying to do a better job listening. I had a couple of aha moments during this conversation. Here I've been, right, the clinician, and it dawned on me that I may need a medication adjustment. I've been on an SSRI medicine for a very, very long time. And like Shan, that way predated my anxiety and depression diagnosis, predated my Parkinson's diagnosis. And now that I'm having all of this apathy, I'm thinking it's probably good to revisit what I am doing with my medications, and maybe a tweak or an adjustment can help some of the apathy. Maybe I don't need quite as much to suppress that anxiety. Maybe I need a little of that juice. I don't know. And I don't have the magic answers, and I'm not offering clinical guidance. But for me, who's sitting back as the family expert, to hear all of you, I'm like, maybe I should pay attention to all of this. Maybe this is a wake-up call for me. So anyway, for what it's worth, thank you all for your guidance. Please stay tuned. I'll get back to you.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, I think that you had asked a question about relationships, and what you said, Kat, I mean, these are relationships that are chosen relationships in my life. And that's an impact for you, and talking about emotions and kind of comparing others' experiences. And I hope we could do that for our community, broader community, by being here. My husband and I actually see a therapist twice a month. That's something that really helps us stay on course, especially because, you know, he says he needs an instruction manual for me. And I agree. I was like, I need one too. You're not the only one. But I think we're really different, and my emotional thermostat affects him. And I think it's helped us to be more aware of our emotions and how we impact each other. And I think it's been a really positive thing for both of us. And I know that because the person who's been helping us is actually retiring. And he asked, you know, if we would like a referral to someone else. And my husband surprisingly said yes. So that's been really helpful with emotions for us.
Yeah, that's an important observation, that, you know, medications can help with some of these challenges that we might face that might impact our relationships, but also just counselors, therapists can help with relationship issues too. So thanks for that observation. And also there's a stigma to that sometimes. So, you know, I don't know if anybody has any comments about navigating that stigma and helping start those conversations, but it's going to be certainly a challenge.
My husband, he tells me that I control how he feels. Like if I feel, and what I mean, if I feel bad, he feels bad. He feels like what I feel. So it's really hard to do if I don't feel 100%. I feel like I need to always feel 100% when I'm around him.
I actually started in that space, and I think that between that and like that pressure I was putting on myself to maintain and be a certain way. And the thing that Kat mentioned earlier, which I see other people saying in the chat, they've had a shorter fuse. And I don't know that it's a shorter fuse for me. It's more like how Kat described it. The emotion comes faster. And everyone who has known me a long time knows me to be a very even keel, like thoughtful. I'm going to wait before I respond. I'm going to not be quick to react. And so to shift to being someone who's quick to react and to be that person who's always trying to not let my emotions impact other people, we had to really shift to a transparent place of I'm telling everyone who has any kind of relationship with me, here's what I'm struggling with, here's if I react in this way that feels short, know that it's not you. We're just having really open conversations. And I'll be honest, some people aren't very comfortable talking about emotional things like that. And I've had people exit my life who now feel like I'm too serious or I want to talk like I'm in therapy with everyone I'm around. But I feel like when you settle into a place where everyone around you is comfortable being that way, all of a sudden it's okay because you're talking about those things. You're not managing each other's emotions. You're all of a sudden starting to have this like, oh, you were short with me just then, as I'm taking it personally, is that about me or are you having a moment, and it just shifted everything. So I kind of just let go of all the pretense and decided that I'd be vulnerable and try to make it so that everyone who stays around me wants to understand and I'm open with them about what's behind it, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like a hard step to take, though, at the same time, right? I mean, that must have been a real challenge, was it?
Um,
Getting
it was
started on that, I mean.
Oh yeah, it was terrifying. I got lucky. I got lucky. I decided pretty early on that all of the intense emotion I was feeling around my diagnosis was grief. And I started seeing a grief like clinical therapist, and that wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And I found the idea of a grief coach, which is often like a death doula grief coach combination in many people. And it was a different approach. And it was a like, how do I integrate this grief into my life versus pretend it doesn't exist or hurry up and get past it as this disease continues to get worse. And she was wonderful and she helped me ease into that because it's terrifying at first. And it's scary to think that you'll lose people when you're losing everything else, or it feels like you're losing everything else. But there's also a real beauty in finding depth and connection that you hadn't found before because you put yourself at that risk. And I won't pretend I didn't lose people. I did. But all the best people stayed.
That's beautiful, Sean. Thank you for sharing that. I don't know if you felt, or now this is a question for everybody else, but I have, along with all those feelings that you really so eloquently explained, do you feel that sometimes you absorb almost somebody's anxiety? So if you're talking to somebody and you're feeling their anxiety. I know that in the chat, Max said that they were feeling anxious as we were talking about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's kind of like what I feel. Like I'm talking to somebody and then I'm like absorbing their anxiety. And then I have to be like, no, stop, separate yourself, center yourself. You're not them. They're not you. You're going to be fine. Has that happened to you guys? I don't know. I wonder if it's part of it.
That's a tip I'll share, actually. It sucks if you really, really like to watch thrillers and if you really like really, angsty music, but
Yes.
I've actually had to step away from a lot of the things I was consuming because if I watch something that's anxiety filled on TV, I'm immediately tense. I don't watch anything that's not like fun and light. I don't listen to any music that's not happy and light. And it's not because I don't like the things I used to like, but because I very quickly absorb. And I can listen to one sad song and be sad all day long. I can, watch 2 seconds. I can watch a kind of scary or kind of exciting commercial and be at it for hours. So I'm just really careful what I consume now because I have to be.
I was thinking all the news that's we're being exposed to in the world news and everything is so anxiety provoking and heartbreaking that can really affect the way we go through our days.
Yeah, Karen.
I wanted to bring up something about facial masking because it came to me. In the morning when my meds aren't working and I'm drinking my coffee and my husband comes into the kitchen, I'll be like, hey, I have no intonation in my voice. I have this straight face. And sometimes he looks at me, hey. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm pissed about that. Like, I'm not meaning to be that way. And he's kind of making fun of it. He doesn't do it mean-spirited, but I had to say something one time because I'm like, that's not how I feel on the inside. It's just the way I'm coming across on the outside. So I'm wondering if facial masking has impacted you guys in terms of not matching what you feel on the inside, or people judging you for being like resting bitch face or whatever. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say that probably. But what has that happened to anybody?
That would be the RBF.
Okay.
PBA, RBF, we're all over the place with these acronyms.
I think I've joked around about having RBF, but I think I legit do, because I don't think I have facial masking yet. It legit is RBF. So that's my struggle.
Yep. You know, my dad had Parkinson's, and one of his early symptoms was that facial masking, and it was hard for us in the beginning. And I got very good at asking my dad, how are you feeling right now, Dad? And he understood why I was asking. So I tried to think of it sometimes like how I would have a conversation on the phone if I didn't know how somebody was feeling or couldn't see their face. I tried to think about that when I was looking at him. And I tried to smile extra, and I find myself now trying to do that a little bit. I don't think I have a lot of facial masking, but inside I feel masked in terms of my emotions. So I'm trying to just be aware of it. Oh, somebody's asking what RBF is. That's the resting BITCH face.
Yeah, it was just Kat's attempt to abbreviate and not put herself in the position of having to say the words
Right.
that Karen had said and then hesitated on. So, I think we want to make good on the statement I made at the beginning that we're going to take some questions, and I think we got 15 minutes left. So I think we'll wrap up this conversation now. And I just want to thank the panelists for being so candid, and just thank you for the audience for putting their questions and their observations in the chat too. And we'll wrap this conversation for now, but we'll continue with the live audience with some Q&A. So don't leave if you're in the audience. And we'll have our next session on February 20th next month, February 20th, and it's the month of Valentine's Day, so we're planning to talk about more directly about love, relationships of any sort, not necessarily romantic relationships only, but just how does Parkinson's affect our relationships with others? And, that may include conversation about love. Yes, it's, and somebody just put in the chat, is it the same time? And yes, it's always the third Thursday at the same time every month. So that varies based on time zone. So, you'll get an email ahead of the time, and it's 12 p.m. Pacific US time. And thank you for being here.